Welcome to today's session on Are You Practicing Exclusive Engagement? We'll just give a few minutes for people to join that are coming in the virtual door. But I'm Kathleen Webster, a senior consultant at Kurunjang Consulting Group, and I'm thrilled to be here today to discuss this topic as it's a real interest and passion of mine. But before we get started today, we at Kurunjang value diversity and inclusion, and it's really important to us to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. And I'm joining here today from the Wurundjeri lands and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. But I would also like to pay my respects to any Aboriginal elders of other communities that are joining us here today. And we welcome you to acknowledge the lands that you're joining us from today in the chat as well. So yeah, feel free to use the chat at the bottom of the screen to talk to us throughout this session. So thank you for joining us today at Kurunjang's Learning Lab session. And these sessions are a focus on developing the community engagement skills for our clients and for the industry. They aim to provide practical skills and tools to take into the engagement practice. And it's a space for experienced practitioners and those just starting out in the industry to come together and discuss a topic. And thanks to those sharing the lands that they're joining us from today, that's great. And great that you found the chat. So for the next 45 minutes, we'll be discussing, are you practicing inclusive engagement? And you'll hear from two of our associates at Kurunjang. We've got Eleanor and Denise joining us today. And yeah, today is an opportunity to consider how we can create a safe and supported space to engage our stakeholders and community to deliver our projects. It's also an opportunity to hear from each other, and we all bring different knowledge and perspectives and lived experience to today's discussion. And we know a lot of you come from the industry, so we want to make this a place that we can share knowledge between the industry. Yeah, so especially people are joining us today from different sectors and even geographic locations. So there's plenty of opportunities to learn from each other. So yeah, just feel free to, throughout the whole presentation, share your examples, experience, projects, tools, and anything that's worked in the chat box. And we'll come back to these throughout the presentations. So today we're joined by Denise Francisco, our senior associate, and Eleanor Howe, our associate from Kurunjang Consulting, and they're going to share their experiences working in the community engagement sector, but in particular related to delivering inclusive engagement. And at what point does engagement become exclusive? But before I pass over to Denise and Eleanor, I just wanted to take a moment to learn about who's in the room today. So you may have seen this tool before, but we'll be using an online engagement tool called Mentimeter. And you can open it up a few different ways. You can either open pull your phone up to the screen and scan the QR code, or on your laptop or on your phone, you can go to a new browser and just put in menti.com and put in the digit on the screen. And then I'll just give Charlotte a moment and we'll bring up the questions on the screen. Yeah, so I'm joining here today from Abbotsford in Melbourne, but and yeah, we've got a few different responses. But yeah, if you open if you share with us the city or the suburb in Melbourne that you're joining from, then we'd just like to see who's here today. So we've got Brunswick West, Carlton, Perth, Perth, Newcastle, from home. Yeah, a lot of people working from home. Oh, that's great. And feel free to keep adding to that. And our second question is, what sector are you joining us here from today? So that should pop up in a moment. Yeah, so at Kupia, being a consultancy, we often work across different sectors, and we know there's quite a few different sectors here today. So we're interested to hear about the different areas that you work in and yeah, how this impacts the way you do community engagement. So a lot of local government, council, the different types of community legal service, coastal management, excellent. Well, this will be really interesting to shape our conversation today, and we'll keep this in mind as Eleanor and Denise do their presentations. But I'll now pass on to Eleanor, who will discuss the policy context for inclusive engagement. Thanks, Eleanor.
Thanks, Kathleen, and great to have so many different people joining us here. I can see a few familiar names, which is always comforting to see some familiar names in our attendees and also in the chat. So welcome, and to those of you who I don't know, welcome as well. So I wanted to start today by sharing some practitioner reflections. So the last few years have really highlighted exclusive practice, but not in a good way. I want to acknowledge that we were, and many of us still are, I know I am, feeling the impacts of restrictions. Over the past few years, especially during and post lockdowns, the resources have been stretched and we've been in survival mode. I've been seeing some bad habits creep into our practice, into Kupia's practice and into my own. I'd like to share some experiences of a few recent projects that we have worked on and projects that I've seen out there, focusing on some of the bad habits. Many times I've seen we haven't included a project phone number, so there's no ability for someone to call up and have a conversation about the project or to provide their feedback and seek additional information. We've been experiencing long surveys. Some of these have over 50 questions. There's been limited or no promotion of events, meaning that people didn't know that the events or the activities were happening. Only one event has been used to provide feedback, and that's only giving people one opportunity. Project material has included lots of jargon, and we're seeing hybrid events start to occur. These can be very challenging to ensure equity of participation between the online participants and the in-person participants. In many instances, there have been no translated materials or materials available in other formats. Decision makers have been seeking feedback on big, complex documents, and some of these have been 100 pages plus. We're repeating engagement processes and methodologies without taking that time to pause and reflect on what we did, what worked, and what didn't work. And we've been expecting the community to come to us. This is because for a long time we couldn't go to them due to restrictions. On the flip side, though, there's a lot more happening in the local grassroots level. There's a bit of a different expectation placed on community engagement. Decision makers are starting to see the value of it and are starting to come around to it, which is different to what it's been like in the past couple of years. And there's an expectation from community that we will engage them. People are also living more local now as we begin to emerge from the pandemic, and people are really valuing their local neighbourhood in ways that they didn't before. They're really connecting with it. We're seeing an interest in community. We're seeing an increase in community interest in place-based engagement. But two questions for you. How do we harness this? How do we ensure that we're being inclusive in our engagement? How do we enable everyone the opportunity to participate? And how do we embrace principles of agility and flexibility into our practice? Before I kind of launch into some of the content that I'm delivering, I just wanted to provide some definitions. So these are our definitions. What is inclusive engagement? So inclusive engagement provides people with opportunities to participation by reducing barriers, creating connections, and engaging in meaningful and supportive ways. A fundamental aspect of engagement is equitable access to the opportunity to participate. Exclusive engagement. It's a process that favours one or benefits one participant group over another. So this could be through using only some medium of engagement, only providing one time slot for events, or only providing information in one format. So you might be asking yourself, why is inclusive engagement important? There's a few different points on screen there. So it increases community confidence and ownership, creates a sense of belonging and social inclusion. It builds capacity and knowledge and strengthens relationships between community members, but also between the decision maker and the community too. It provides evidence-based decision-making. It's efficient and effective service delivery, starts to identify emerging issues and risks, and in many instances, a statutory requirement and an expectation from the community. There are some risks of exclusive engagement. Decision makers don't understand the full picture. The decision may be based on the views of a minority. The beneficiaries do not have an opportunity to contribute. The outcomes do not reflect the true needs, values, or aspirations of the community. And community members turn against a project or a proponent. There is some comments in the slide here around sharing the slides. Absolutely, we are recording this session and we can make the slides available as well. So I do just want to pause here briefly and just ask the group to share in the chat what they've been observing. There's a few engagement practitioners in our virtual room. Have you come across any processes that have not been accessible and inclusive? That could be as an engagement practitioner, something you've seen at your work, be it in a state government or local government department, or a project that you've seen as a community member happening in your area. It'd be really interesting to know. So I'll just get you to pop it into chat, but I'll keep going through my content because I've got a lot to get through. So government agencies have a responsibility to deliver inclusive engagement. Public engagement is embedded in legislation, regulations, and directives. They guide why, when, and how the community are engaged on projects and decisions. Now, I do want to preface this section by stating that no one at CAPIA is a lawyer, but we do understand the expectations of community engagement, expectations of inclusive community engagement. On the next few slides are some insight into the legislation landscape to highlight some of the risks that you might be unaware of. The first one I would like to share with you is the Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities Act 2006. It sets out the basic rights, freedoms, and responsibilities of all people in Victoria and contains 20 rights that reflect 4 basic principles under freedom, respect, equality, and dignity. Some of the things you may need to consider when you're designing your engagement to be inclusive is, are you presenting information in multiple ways? That may be a full version of a document, could be a summary version of that full document. It could be cut up into a video or some fact sheets around what the information you're trying to share. Using plain English, acknowledging literacy levels in your project materials and events. Perhaps you include a video, a short 30-second video that summarizes the information you're trying to share. Are you seeking feedback from the community in multiple ways? So for example, this could be orally, in writing, in print, by way of art, or in mediums chosen by the community member. Are you providing different time slots for events? So that could be weekend, daytime, weekday, evening, etc. The second legislation I would like to share is a Disability Act. It ensures a person with disability cannot be discriminated against or treated unfairly because of their disability. It aims to advance the inclusion and participation in the community of people with a disability. Things to consider when you're designing your engagement to ensure it is inclusive. Are the venues you're using accessible? Can people access online events? Having closed captions, it's an option that we can have on Zoom. Are you providing hard copies of your information? Is that available? This could be at sessions or perhaps posted to participants ahead of time. Maybe that's in a large font as well. When you're designing your engagement, are you considering people who are significant to the person who has a disability? So that could be a family member or a carer. And are you asking people what they need to participate? In this way, you can individualize the support that you're going to be offering them to ensure they can participate. The last piece of Victorian legislation I would like to share is the Equal Opportunity Act. It provides providers of services have a duty to take reasonable and proportionate steps to eliminate discrimination as far as possible, and must make reasonable adjustments for people with disabilities so they can participate or access a service, and this includes when providing information. Some things to consider when designing your engagement: ensure you have information and opportunities in languages other than English. Have interpreters at events. And again, ask people what they need to participate. This is going to be different for everyone. I know it's going to be different for me as it is for my other colleagues on screen. So this could be childcare to ensure that people who have small people can come along. It could be cost to cover transport, be that via taxi or Uber, etc. It could be having a venue with a private clean space for a mother to breastfeed or to express breast milk. And a framework from beyond Victoria is the Australian Public Service Framework for Engagement and Participation. So it publicly communicates the quality and type of engagements the public can expect. It provides guidance and support to enhance engagement and improve policy, programs and services to deliver better outcomes for citizens. Things to consider when you're designing engagement: make sure you provide opportunities for everyone to be heard. Be inclusive and ensure diverse voices are heard, not just the loudest voices. Offer multiple feedback channels and proactively seek appropriate participants. So pause in your engagement, have a think about who haven't you heard from yet, and ensure you remove barriers to their participation. I just wanted to, I haven't had a look at chat yet, but I will shortly once I hand over to Denise and pick up some of the comments and questions in there. But I'm interested to know, that was just a snapshot. We have people from maybe outside Australia today and definitely from outside Victoria. I'm interested to know what other framework, legislation or policies you refer to when you're designing engagement. I know that when we work with local councils, we'll often look at their engagement policy to make sure that whatever we're designing is reflective of their own engagement policy and their adopted way of engaging with their communities. I'm going to jump into the chat and have a look through some of the comments and respond to some of them. And I'm going to hand over to Denise now. Thanks, Denise.
Thank you so much, Eleanor, and it's so wonderful to see so many people taking time out to reflect on their practice, whether your engagement is inclusive or exclusive. And I can see there's been quite a few comments in the chat there responding to some of the things that you're seeing out there. I saw there about cost and budget. It's difficult to engage families. Yes, engagement often is seen as a tick the box exercise, and we do need to get better, don't we? Look, I'm going to start to talk a little bit about some of the practical things that we do. Let's think about the place that your projects relate to. I'm going to look at Collingwood as an example. Collingwood is the location of Kapir's new office. We're shortly moving to the Commons in Gipp Street, so be sure to come and check out where we are if you're in our neck of the woods. But let's look at the diversity of Collingwood. So households where there's a non-English language is 28% in Collingwood. There are several different languages spoke at home: Vietnamese, Mandarin, Somali, Oromo, Cantonese. 19% are 30 to 34-year-olds and 17.5% are 25 to 29-year-olds. And most of the projects we need to engage with that cohort. I mean, how many 29-year-olds do you reach in your engagement? Sometimes it's, that cohort that is the harder to reach. Approximately 20% have one long-term health condition and 5% have more than 2 conditions, whether that be mental health, arthritis, mobility challenges. Family composition is 62.5% are couples, families without children, 19% are couples, families with children, 15% are one-parent families, and 85% of that 15% are female lone parents. 42% are single, 64% rent their own home. So it gives you a bit of a sense of some of the kind of financial impact there. 68% live in a flat or an apartment, and that includes public housing. So Collingwood has the highest concentration of public housing in Victoria. 28% don't have a car. So start to think about, some of the barriers that people might experience and how are you going to reach them. Also consider those that will have a particular interest in or those that may be impacted by your projects. On the screen is a number of different groups that we are actively reaching out to or proactively reaching out to engage with around a broad range of projects. Some examples of projects that we've worked on recently, working with a local government area who are responding to the 26th of January. Some key target groups there are obviously traditional owner groups, but also culturally and linguistically diverse communities who participate in citizenship ceremonies on Australia Day. We've reached out to service providers in particular to design specific services such as mental health services. And we've also had to reach out to children and young people to input their views into a municipal-wide health and wellbeing plan. So if you're not reaching these people through your engagement, you are being exclusive. So who else makes up your communities? Who else do you need to reach through your engagement? So I'll ask you, based on the projects that you're working on, if there's a particular group in the community that you need to reach, I'd invite you to share that in the chat now. So how do you make your engagement inclusive? It's really important to know your stakeholders. Talk to the other people in the area to find out which engagement activities which have been successful in the past. Things don't always stay the same, and there may be circumstances that are happening in your local community that you're not aware of. And you won't know that until you go out and talk to people yourself in the planning of your engagement. Recognise that you may need time to invest in engaging your whole community. This includes promotion, reaching out to others, maybe translating materials depending on the diversity of the community that you want to reach. It can take time to build these relationships and to build their confidence in what you're trying to achieve. Involve your community as early as possible by asking your community how they would like to be engaged. Go to the community. Don't expect them to come to you. And to do that, you could use existing networks, but don't realise that it is difficult and time-consuming to build those networks yourself. Address any barriers for harder to reach. We sort of touched on that earlier when looking at the diversity of the communities that you're reaching out to. And of course, this will be different for each project. Depending on your project, it may be necessary to target engagement to particular groups. And the best way to do this is to go to where they will be. For younger people, obviously schools is a good starting point there. Youth centres where young people are regularly attending programs or activities. Places where young people go. Activity-based, it might be where they're playing sport or where they're participating in arts activities. Shopping centres, young people love to shop. It might be op shops. If you're reaching out to older people, everybody in the community knows somebody who's over 55 years of age. So it might be through family members that you reach out to older people. It might be going directly to their homes. Seniors groups, there's a lot of culturally diverse seniors groups, and they are in every neighbourhood across the state. If you're reaching out to culturally diverse communities, community networks and organisations are a good place to start. And of course, cultural centres, places of worship and culturally specific events and festivals is a great way to reach people from culturally diverse background. If you're trying to reach a particular group who has a specific area of interest, it might be environmental, sport and recreation groups, arts, heritage, whatever it might be. Most of these groups promote what they're doing via their social networks. And so reach out directly to them via their social networks. I can see in the chat there a couple of comments that sometimes we place too much emphasis on online. And I see post-pandemic, We are continuing a bit of online engagement, but I've certainly been experiencing, getting back into the community and meeting people face to face. So I think, yes, the world has changed forever, but it's so important to make sure that you continue to meet people face to face. Comment there, traditional landowners are such an over-engaged community at times and often speak of frustration, and that's absolutely true. And if we're honouring self-determination by traditional owners, then we need to ask them what's the best way to engage with them, and it might not be the right time given the many demands that they have on their plate. So I'll just cover off some general tips. Always offer support to participants to address barriers. Always provide people with more than one option to participate. One size does not fit all. We do need to provide a mix of online, a mix of in-person. It's so easy to do a survey. It's so easy to go out on the street and do some intercept conversations with people. Make sure you're engaging at different times. It needs to be a mix, a weekday, a weekend, during the evening is important. Approach online tools with caution. I think it's important to keep it simple. Sometimes tools that are a bit too flashy can actually be a barrier for people to participate. And we do need to take time to, help people feel comfortable with the tools that they're using or that we're asking them to use. Work with community champions or service providers who can reach the people you need to reach. And of course, plan appropriate contingencies if plans or circumstances change. So I'll just pause there. What's something different you've done to reach those that you need to engage with? We'll invite people to share some of the innovative ways that you've reached different groups in the chat. What's something that you've done that's worked really, really well? I'll come back to have a look at some of those suggestions in a minute. I do want to talk briefly about recruitment and promotion, because you can plan the most amazing engagement, but if you're not reaching the people you need to reach, and that's about, bums on seats, then there's no point. You need to allow adequate lead time for recruitment and promotion. I think sometimes we make decisions, we're going to lock in our engagement, then we forget about how do we get people to participate. It can be terribly disappointing if you are passionate about a project and you don't hear about it until the opportunity has passed and you're already booked up. There's nothing worse. Use different ways to get the word out. And that means using your social media networks and platforms, advertising in some cases, because it might not be a topic that people are particularly interested in, but you still really need to reach people and get their views. A letterbox drop in a particular area, local area, is sometimes the best way to get the word out. You might be creative and put decals on the pavement to capture people's attention. You might go directly to service providers to include information in their network newsletters. Sometimes old school is the best way. Send people an email. Why not even pick up the phone and have a chat to people? So many organisations, businesses, councils, they're all competing to get information out there, and we all want easier and immediate access to information. So this might require multiple efforts. Be creative with your call to action. This might be different for different groups. So what you might say to older people might be pitched differently to a group of younger people or even children. So consider what language will resonate with or capture the attention of the stakeholders that you'd like to reach. So I'm just going to go back now into the chat and share some of the examples that people have commented on there. Youth symposium that had direct involvement from schools, that was part of the curriculum, fantastic. And that would lead, there's a flow-on effect there for ongoing youth participation. Targeting a cross-section of groups, people with disability, older adults, young people with face-to-face consultation. So having dedicated sessions that are set up for those particular groups in the community. Letterbox drops work really well. Connecting with Meals on Wheels there for housebound clients, fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing those examples in the chat. I'm going to touch on a few examples of projects that we've worked on recently and some during the pandemic. The first one was for the City of Greater Geelong, and it was to inform the development of their positive ageing strategy. What you're seeing on your screen is an overview of a co-design process, essentially. And co-design in its simplest form, it's an overused word, but in its simplest form, it's about people with lived experience sitting alongside experts. In this particular instance, we engaged with an existing Ageing Well advisory group, and we sought their advice to develop a conversation toolkit. We charged staff from across council and service providers with the task to reach out to people who are over 55 years and have a conversation with them. We did this project right in the middle of the pandemic, and you can imagine, that was seemingly a daunting task. But by doing the conversation toolkit, we were able to actually reach about 247 people and a diverse age range above 55 years of age. We had an online recording tool that we used on an online web platform to record the conversations. During those conversations, we sought expressions of interest for people over 55 to participate in 2 design forums. The data from the conversation toolkit was presented to the forum participants, and that was the evidence base for them to test, refine and prioritise ideas. We then had a targeted conversation with staff from across council, who then further synthesised and tested the ideas, which we then presented back to the forum participants, who then voted on priority actions. The next example I'm going to share is targeting a local community neighbourhood for a pilot project. And this was to lead to their own community strengthening project. The idea was for them to come up with ideas for how to make their community, Kurunjang, an even better place to live, and to develop projects to increase community safety. Kapir hosted a Kurunjang end-of-year block party at the Kurunjang Community Hub, a brand new community hub, which the local community was still familiarising themselves. And the idea was to inform the community about the project, to gather ideas at the block party about what things could be improved or nurtured to make life better in their local community. It was to understand what the community was interested in and what they would like to do. And it was to invite members of people in the community to form a community-led group to design and deliver the Kurunjang Community Project. We promoted the event to the Kurunjang community by distributing flyers directly to homes in Kurunjang, and we handed out flyers at the primary school and at the local village store. We placed posters around the neighbourhood, sharing information through communication channels such as the local schools. The event hosted a range of free activities, including a ninja course, a jumping castle, face painting and craft activities. We had a DJ with music and dancing, special performances from Elsa the Disney princess, and we provided some locally sourced catering. It's pretty fair to say it was a fantastic, enjoyable day. It was a great way to reach children, 5 to 11, and parents, of course, 35 to 49-year-olds who lived in the local area. Community members were invited to provide feedback on what they loved about Kurunjang, what they wanted to see improved, and what they were passionate about. Participants were then invited to either provide their details to get involved with the project or to take a flyer to promote the project to a neighbour or friend. Members of the community who answered all the questions were gifted with a tomato plant or a coffee voucher to use at the Kurunjang village store. The last project I'll touch on is the Monash Deliberative Panel. This was to inform council plan priorities. The participants were drawn from the City of Monash's existing online community panel and their advisory groups, and they were invited to seek to register their interest in participating. The intention was to involve a representative sample of the Monash community as much as practical, and that's not always going to be the case. Participants were provided a $100 gift voucher to acknowledge their time because we were asking them to contribute a fair bit of time to the engagement process. During the first workshop, participants learnt how to collect stories about others' experiences so that they weren't just talking about their own experiences. They were provided with a toolkit for how to explore different narratives. We provided them some instructions for how to collect information using an online tool. We provided them, you know, an amount of time, 11 days I think it was, to collect other stories and to put them into the recording tool. We collected about 68 stories, or the community collected 68 stories, should I say. And on the slide in front of you there is a couple of the story titles that gives you a bit of a snapshot of the stories that we heard. I'll just touch on a couple there. An area where kids get a quality education. Dog-loving grandma. Thoughts from a millennial in Monash. Apartments. Yeah, nah, yeah. I think we've all heard that story. So I know we're running out of time. I think I might hand back to Eleanor, who's just going to maybe recap what we've discussed here this morning in the webinar, and then we might hear from you about maybe some questions that you've got.
Thanks, Denise. I'm going to pull everything together before we've got time for some questions. So we've put together a checklist. It's not a entirety checklist. I'm sure there's other things that you need to consider when you're designing inclusive engagement, but here are some key things to consider. We've got 10 points. The first one is, have you asked the community, or do you have an understanding about how the community would like to be informed of opportunities? Have you asked the community how they would prefer to participate? Does a person have options in how they participate in your engagement? Can a person request information in different formats or languages? Are venues for events universally accessible? Can a person request support to participate? That might be, I've never used Zoom before, help me. And we often sit down with a participant over the phone or in Zoom for a 15-minute chat just to make sure they feel comfortable. Are you using relevant pictures or visual aids to support your written information? Can a person talk to someone over the phone? Have you considered people's religion and cultural needs? And have you created a safe space for everyone to participate? I'm going to hand over to Kath because we've got a few minutes left, about 7 minutes left for some questions. So I'll hand back to you, Kath.
Thanks, Eleanor, and thanks, Denise and Eleanor, for your presentations today. I'll keep an eye on the Zoom chat. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask Eleanor and Denise, please post them in there. While you're thinking of some questions, I've got one to get us started. And I think it's quite relevant based on the discussions in the chat today. And it's, have you got any tips for participants here today of how they can advocate the importance of inclusive engagement with their colleagues and peers, and maybe the people that have to approve their resourcing, budgets, time allocation? So yeah, Eleanor or Denise.
I think Denise I can hear her typing. So I think she's visibly responding to some of the questions that have popped up in chat there. I think there was one around the recording tool that you mentioned, Denise, for the Geelong project.
That's exactly right. I'm typing a response to that now, but you go ahead and answer Kath's question and I'll answer that one afterwards.
Sounds good. Thanks, Denise. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about a piece of advice, but I'm going to refer to budgets because I think it is important. You know, it's the same problem that we have as well. Often we're working within our clients' budgets and our clients' timeframes, which can be political and be a very, very short engagement period, or there can be minimal budgets that have been provided to deliver engagement. I think one way to get around it is having a phone call, having a place where someone can call and have a conversation with you. I think that's really important. It shouldn't take too much more cost or time away from the project team to be able to respond to those needs. And that could be coupled with an online survey and perhaps some targeted interviews with people where you go out to people and have conversations with them. That could be inclusive. As long as you're providing multiple opportunities for people to participate and targeting those opportunities to the needs of your participants, definitely it's inclusive. Denise?
Thanks, Eleanor. I might just pick up a couple of other questions there in the chat. One was about the online recording tools that we use, and I think I mentioned one for positive ageing strategy in Geelong, as well as Monash. Most municipal councils have an online platform, and the tools that they have can be set up very easily, where you provide a link or a space where people can input responses to the conversations that they're having. So we generally would use online platforms that are already at council's disposals. But, you know, SurveyMonkey, there are some really, you know, cost-effective recording tools that you can use and design to collect stories that others are seeking. Which is, I think, just in response to that question there about budgets, you know, it's some of those projects where we've reached lots of people, it were inexpensive because we charged people to go out and have those conversations, people who had a vested interest, who wanted to go and talk to members in their community, which meant that you weren't necessarily having to do all the arms and legs work. So I think that's, you know, we tried to share some examples there that weren't really using top dollar budgets. We've got a question there about how do we change practitioners, especially local councils, thinking from telling communities what they need to actually engaging and asking them. Yeah, it's a hard one. You know, I think there's a balance, isn't there, between councils needing to engage, to inform decisions, but they'll always, you know, there will always be an interest from local community in what councils are doing. So I guess it's in the framing. It's always in the framing. I think it's about inviting people to hear their views and it not being about what it is that council needs you to do. Because most of the time, what council needs you to do is important for the local community. So it's about how you frame that, how you draw people into wanting to participate. But as I said earlier, sometimes people don't know that they're interested until you actually ask them or go reach out to them and have a conversation. Eleanor, do you have any further reflections on that?
No, I don't, but there's a few other comments. So I'm looking into the chat, Denise. I wasn't quite listening what you were saying there, but there's two comments in here. One is around using incentives. We have been using incentives a little bit. We've been trying to keep them local and relevant to that project. So there's some where we've used, you know, $100 for a deliberative process, $100 gift card that was, you know, to the local shopping area to encourage people to spend more locally. This was during the pandemic. And for a recent recreation project, we've allowed people given away passes to the rec centre that we were talking about to encourage more participation into that rec centre. I am very conscious of time, and Andrew, I see your question in there around hybrid engagement. I reckon you should have a conversation with Denise. Denise has done lots of hybrid engagement, half-day workshops with a couple of hundred participants, and I think she'd give you some really good interesting insights if you are interested in that. But I'm going to pass over to Kathleen because we are at 11:44.
Yeah, thanks, Eleanor. And yeah, I definitely agree with checking in with Denise because yeah, she's done quite a few hybrid events recently. But thank you for joining us today. I'll wrap us up, but we hope that this Learning Lab inspires you to think about your upcoming engagement projects with diversity and inclusion in mind. We'll be posting the checklist that Eleanor referred to on our webpage, which is on the screen. And we'll also put our recording on the webpage, as well as we've got a YouTube and other social media platforms. So we'll post the recording so you can rewatch it. But yeah, please keep an eye out for upcoming Learning Lab events, and we hope you enjoyed today. But until next time, thank you. And yeah, we'll really look forward to seeing you at a future event. Thank you.
See you, everyone.
Thanks.